Welcome to Athletes to Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct. We've created a platform where athletes and other alumni can network and connect through their alumni groups. And this show is all about athletes transitioning out of sports. It's become a major issue today. It's been an issue for a while now, but whether it's mental health, financial literacy, and we interview former collegiate and professional athletes and talk about their journey. And the idea is to teach and inspire athletes that there is life after sports. And we're so excited today to have Alex Bolowich on. How you doing, Alex?
Doing great. Thank you.
That's great. So Alex was a former soccer player. He went to Creighton University. And then once he got out, he parlayed that love of soccer into being a youth soccer coach, really wanted to make an impact there, but ultimately become a professional soccer coach. He got into some personal training and then decided that kind of wanted to go in that different direction of that entrepreneurial spirit that a lot of us have and a lot of athletes have. And he went on and he became the founder and CEO of Elite Mental Performance. So Alex, we always talk about playing sports growing up. How did that shape you leading up into, say, college?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough that my parents allowed me to try whatever sports I wanted to. My dad was the soccer coach at UNC. So soccer was a big part of my family and my upbringing, and it was a sport that I enjoyed most. So out of all the sports I did try, I stuck with it. But it was very much a part of this segue into connecting values to who you are, how you do things. And it was more than just a game at sometimes. When I was younger, it's obviously a game, but you start to go into high school and it starts to become a vehicle for fulfilling goals. And then when you start to become older, now it starts to segue into a vehicle for connecting to, deeper things, life, values, relationships, stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot there. There's definitely some good nuggets for people to listen to on that one. So did you dream about being a professional athlete? And was it soccer or was it another sport when you were a kid?
Oh yeah, no, I wanted to be a professional soccer player since I can remember. And there was actually an exercise, a very simple one. I'll never forget this. When I was in first grade, I believe, and the teacher asked all of us in the class, like, write down top 5 things that you would want to be one day. And it was professional soccer player, professional soccer coach, college soccer player, college soccer coach, and astronaut. I couldn't think of anything else. So it was clear to me that that was what I wanted to do at that time.
Yeah, I joke around about it all the time, and I'll say, I did want to be a Major League Baseball player. Unfortunately, the talent wasn't there, so I'm doing what I do today. So,
Yeah.
one thing I want to talk about, and I like to talk about with the younger athletes, let's talk a little about social media. So, when you were probably going through, I don't know if it started when you were high school or more in college, but talk about the impact social media has in maybe some pros and cons of how athletes and others, young people, should navigate through it.
Yeah. So we have really two huge influences of social media to be aware of. Um, I never like to completely say that it's 100% negative and awful and this and the other. We need to understand the benefits that come with some things. But with that, it's clear there is some cons or negatives to it. And one of them is cyberbullying and people using social media platforms to harass other people. And I've seen it not only as a player, but as a soccer coach with like teenagers and like even blackmailing each other. And there's just not much education or literacy around social media etiquette in that regard. And I think it's getting a little bit better. Um, the awareness has started to rise in that regard. So that's number one. And then number two is the effects that social media has on your dopaminergic system, which is just how your neurotransmitters are responding to this device. And it's numbing a very crucial survival and reward neurotransmitter called dopamine. and you don't want it to be numbed. You actually want it to be sensitive. But when you're scrolling through this thing aimlessly and you're just checking out TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, you are taking away a very fundamental, impactful neurotransmitter that helps you with understanding reward and how to then learn. So we see it from two main angles. One is just the side effects of scrolling, and then the other one is the actual human interactions through social media that need to be aware of.
Yeah, and I think that you always hear stories and preface it, athletes or young people in general just saying things in social media that they really shouldn't say. It kind of comes back and haunts them later on. And I think you brought up a good point. I think there's kind of a need for education on that. Maybe that's something that obviously would need start. I mean, you could say it could start as little as middle school, but at least in high school, and just guiding athletes, especially now too. We'll talk about it a little bit later on, but name, image, likeness, NIL. It's a big platform, obviously, using social media, and people need to navigate it through properly. So kind of switching topics. So one of the things we talk a lot about is the education of athletes when they transition out of sports. And it's something that, again, you're newer to it, getting out of college. So, you've probably seen differences in, maybe what I would have seen when I went to school. But at Creighton, did they have programs, and not just for soccer, but athletes in general, that kind of helped maybe guide, in, whether it be mental health or financial literacy, for things to look for in the future once the playing career was over?
Yeah, to an extent. When I was there, I graduated in 2014, and I remember we all as athletes had to take this one class of financial literacy, but it was a 1 day thing. It wasn't even a class. It was just like a seminar. And it briefly went over, understanding auto loans and mortgages and taxes and stuff like that. Something that I feel like should have been, implemented for a whole semester at least, and that should actually be a class I think all students, let alone student athletes, should take, is
Right.
understanding all of those um nuances in and outs. But yeah, so from that transition to financial literacy, there was a little bit of that. Mental health resources, we had them and we have them at Creighton. They're doing a much more proactive approach now, from what I've seen, than when I was there. And when I was there, I also want to make sure that I'm giving them their credit, because I was completely turned off by anything like that as an athlete. So I wasn't even opening my eyes and ears to those. I'm sure they probably mentioned it a million times that, hey, we have, sports psychologists, we have, career transition. They had everything. Like, for a small school, they really had everything set in place to help you. I was just not the one using them, which was my own fault. So,
Yeah, and I think that's probably with a lot of athletes, especially as you get to these elite athletes, that they're zoned in on the game. So in I guess credit to the schools too. You're right; they might have some of those resources, and I think you hit it with taking like just that 1 day versus like a longer, whether it be a class or like a 3-4 week workshop. I was talking to one other athlete, football player, and he mentioned the same thing. He said he wishes he would have had that when he was at school, that almost kind of forcing him into it. But even then, like you said, it's all, I guess, up to the athlete whether they're going to take it in. Uh, but the value there is something that can really help them in the future, and that's some of the things that we're trying to do is, go into universities, maybe in high schools, into the athletic department, and try to help them develop additional curriculum in those different key areas of mental health and financial literacy. Could be career services, sales, just different things to help prepare these athletes for their future after sports. So another area that I always like to talk about is alumni engagement, and obviously with Alumni Direct, that's what we're all about. How at Creighton, and if you could speak both not only soccer but maybe from what you saw of other sports there, was there athletes coming back? And I don't mean just for like the tailgate parties or the the big games or like golf tournaments, but did athletes come back and work with the current athletes there?
quite a lot. Yeah, quite a lot. And I mean, I know that they had, I think, both in volleyball I remember one of them came back to become like a reporter for Creighton basketball. One of them became an assistant coach. Women's soccer was a former men's soccer player, came back to be the head women's coach at Creighton. Their athletic department as well, and all of the administrators, a lot of them came from Creighton. Uh, Grad students working with, the doing assistant coaching, so to speak. Um, yeah, it was interesting. It was really cool to see that at Creighton, and they really do influence that, and they endorse that, encourage it. So really beneficial. From now, I remember being at UNC. I wasn't there, but I mean, I grew up there because of my dad, and I think that that's pretty common at UNC as well. Um, but that was so long ago, and I was a lot younger, so I wasn't really paying attention to things
Right.
like that.
Yeah, and I think it's probably changing too. It's we always recommend that just tap into your alumni. People want to help, and I think it's sometimes what happens, from what I understand too, is that when the coaching staffs change, there's kind of a cultural change, maybe in that program, whatever the sport might be, and that could affect it as well too, because the current coach doesn't necessarily have ties into those alumni athletes. So maybe they're not reaching out as much, but we obviously encourage both the schools and the athletic departments, but it's also a two-way street. I mean, the athletes have to want to do it as well. So another part of that, and we talk about aside alumni engagement, is networking, connecting, and I'm sure you see it now with your business and all that. But talk about the same thing there. Talk about networking, connecting when you're still playing the sport, and then kind of the importance of that.
So what's interesting is when I was a player and I'm thinking about going into soccer coaching, my dad was our soccer coach at Creighton, and he was at UNC for 25 to 30 years, somewhere in that range. So I'm thinking, okay, my connections to the soccer world are met, right? For me, if that's the world I want to dive into, there's plenty of people that have at least been in an association with my dad, and whether he worked closely with them or not, would be able to open up the doors. So that's where it's funny because it wasn't even my dad that was helping me out. It was my goalkeeper coach from when I was a youth player. When I graduated, he reached out to me, and he was like, I heard you want to get into soccer coach. I'm like, yeah. And he goes, let me hook you up with our executive director in Charlotte. And so I go in for an interview, and they know of my dad and me, but they don't have any interpersonal relationship or anything like that. So, but they understand that there's a pedigree and a background there. So they want to entertain my options of being a soccer coach, what I want in my future. And they hired me. I went there, coached here for 4 years, no problem. Um, so with me, it was a little bit of a fortunate and very grateful position to be in, considering that's the world I wanted to step into. Um, but in regard to other athletes, the ones who want to step into other worlds, using your college resources are huge. I always say it's not about how many resources you have, but it's about being resourceful. So I got lucky with the resource that I had with my dad being a big soccer figure and being able to have many connections through him. But guess what? Your coach at your university is a big figure in that world. And let's say it's another world you want to get into. You want to go into the financial world. You want to go into the web design world. There are people in your university right now that have just a massive web and network of connections, and they can't read your mind. So they don't know that that's what you want to do. So you have to go get out of your way and say, hey, I want to step into this world. I don't know where to start, or I don't know who to talk to, or do you have any advice? And you'll see immediately they'll be like, let me get you in contact with so and so. And it's that simple. It's just a conversation. So
Yeah, and you said some keys there. The first one I kind of picked up on too was you talked about your youth soccer coach, and I think that's something important that as you're growing up, continue, it's all about building relationships. And then, whether it's your coaches, whether it's, parents or friends or just people that you meet along the way. And then, like you said, just utilizing those resources when you're in college. And, I always tell people too, it's not, I mean, you always talk about it's not necessarily who people know, but who knows you. That's one thing. But the other thing I always look at is it's not necessarily the person that you might have that relationship. It could be somebody they know, like you said, is that, that coach saying, hey, let me make all these connections for you. So I think it's always important to look at that and to tap into that network. And, I've talked to player agents before where they've said the biggest challenges they see is that athletes not networking when they're still playing. So then they get done all of a sudden, like, okay, here I am, let's get in the real world and I'm going to get all this stuff coming to me because I was like this star athlete, and then not so much the case because they didn't build those relationships along the way. So that great stuff there. Let's talk a little bit about NIL, name, image, likeness, and I always like to bring this up, and you get varying answers on it. So kind of want to get your take, both positives and negatives.
Yeah, so that's been a recent development. And I think the obvious positive is the fact that the universities aren't just leveraging the player's name, image, and likeness and benefiting financially from that player. I remember way back in the day, right? Chris Webber played at Michigan. He was a basketball player. And he had mentioned how his university is making who knows how many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars just by his shirt with the number 4 on the back, right? His jersey. And he goes, and I don't see a dime of that, but I'm the one who's actually creating the value of that jersey. So you see the disconnect there. And that was a long time ago. So it's been in the process for a while. And I'm a big advocate of saying we're not going to get things 100% accurate, but we got to take some steps somewhere and figure it out and refine the process. So I'm glad that they took this step. Now, the fact that players are getting compensated for their effort and their value to the team has been helping them and hasn't really just been benefiting the university to then do whatever they want to with that kind of money. Now, the drawback to this is we're seeing how it's impacting athletes, first of all, through distractions and different motives on why they're at a university. Are they there for the academics, or are they there for the fact that if they go there, they could get an NIL deal and they could start getting paid, or they can start getting, free gear and free whatever. And 2 is a distraction. I coached college for one season at UNC Charlotte, and some of these athletes are already like getting deals with Liquid IV. And, now it's like, okay, well, we're in season right now, and I kind of want to grab your phone and tell Liquid IV to buzz off because we got bigger things to focus on. And it's like, that's, as a coach, like that's what happens, but you can't do that. You have to, navigate that space and find that recognition and reward for it. So there is that distraction that could happen. And then the motives start to change. Now it starts to change the transfer portal because athletes could be making greater NIL deals if they go to this college. They may not even play, right? But just because you're at this college, let's say it's a top 5 school or Power 5 conference, you're in the SEC, ACC, and you're now just a part of that team. You're getting some form of check, and just for being part of that team. Whereas you could have been at, App State and starting all 4 years, and there you could have actually appreciated your college experience maybe a little bit more, because memories, like, how do you put a value on that? Right. And so that's where it starts to change that. People are starting to just jump into the transfer portal based off of NIL deals over that they could get somewhere else based off of the connection with the university. You start to see the distraction happening now because a lot of it isn't even NIL deals because of your athletic performance. It's NIL deals because of your influence on social media, right? You could just be a TikTok dancer and you could have 100,000 followers, but that gets you an NIL deal now. And that's your name, image, and likeness. And it's bizarre for me to actually wrap my mind around that um, concept. But I have to step out of my own biases and look at it from how does one really get enticed by something like that. Um, so
Yeah.
it's you see the pro that I mentioned, but
Right.
then comes with it
Yeah.
4 or 5 pretty big, setbacks, and I'm sure probably that trickles down to many more.
Yeah, and I think you hit on a big one there too with distraction, because I think it does distract, and I guess too, if depending on the sport, but I mean it could open up. I've had a couple people talk about opening up. I want to say whether it's jealousies or whatever. I mean, there's get people that get maybe getting these deals, and then because they're in the limelight, maybe they're starting and they shouldn't be starting. There might be somebody better. I mean, there's a lot of things, but there's also a lot of positives to it, and I think just like we talked before about social media, certainly a need for education. I think for coaches and the athletes' families to better understand it, especially in areas like financial literacy, which there's a whole nother area that goes with that. So let's talk about we talk about transitioning out of sports. So let's talk about you've played soccer your whole life, and now you're finishing up on your playing career, but getting ready to go into coaching. So talk a little about when you were done playing in college, and what that next journey looked like.
Yeah, so I knew that going into soccer coaching to start, and when you start from the ground up, financially, you're not going to be incredibly lucrative or anything like that. And you got to pay your dues. So I also decided to become a certified personal trainer and work in the fitness world. It was just another passion of mine. I like helping people out. Why not? So I was, like I said, fortunate enough to be hired by the soccer club in Charlotte, come back to my home state. Right? I grew up in Chapel Hill, but Creighton is in Omaha, Nebraska. And I was working there for 4 years, and I was working as a personal trainer for 4 years. And during that time, I wanted to become an MLS soccer coach. I wanted to go into the professional leagues, and I wanted to at least help the MLS gain more respect on a global scale. And that was all that I could see, which was totally fine. It was a vision, it was a goal. And along the way, not only through my own experiences I had in college from a mental performance and a psychological challenge and journey, I saw a lot of athletes, a lot of soccer players that were struggling with something psychologically, or couldn't even just materialize it. It was almost like they just wanted to get better, but there was a block that was happening and they couldn't. And we evaluate players on 4 criteria: technical, tactical, physical, psychological, but we didn't really have any training for them in the psychological field. And you hear coaches and so many others talking about how this younger generation's so soft, they're mentally weak, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's a cover up. You know, that's not taking responsibility. That's not okay with me. I'm like, we're the ones creating them. Like, ever since they're born, right? They're in a subconscious state of development. They're being conditioned by us. So this is our doing. And we have to do something about that. That's different. So that's when I wanted to get into the sports psychology world, and I went to go get my master's in that and graduated with it. So my transition from graduating college to where I am now was actually something that I didn't even foresee in myself. Right? I didn't see this happening. I wanted to become a professional soccer coach. And I think that's important to identify for all of the athletes that are getting outside of collegiate sports and join the world. We may have a very clear line of sight of what we want to do, right? Awesome, right? You may not have a clear line of sight of what you want to do. Well, that's okay, but do something, right? And along the way, you're going to figure out if that's the actual thing that you want to do. And it's not to say that I don't love soccer. Being a professional soccer coach isn't important, right? It is. It's awesome. But it's like what calls out to you, you'll find out. And I think a lot of people want to figure it out right away, and they want to get into this world like, by the age of 30, I have to, have this amount of money saved up and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, these are good goals and all of that. But to keep our minds open, because there's so many opportunities out there.
Oh
So
yeah,
that was
no doubt.
my yeah.
There are. So like what would be so you got when you got done with coaching, because this was something interesting. I've talked about it too, that sometimes I say that because you're not coaching anymore, right? I mean, you're like part of your businesses, but so was there a transition out of that too? Because now here it is, now you've kind of, you're not disengaged from the soccer world, but basically now you've played, you've coached, now you're on to your next journey. Was there a tough transition with that?
I wouldn't say it was tough. Um, it's funny, a lot of people, I've never really understood this. I don't know if this is just how I'm wired, but I've always heard that, running a business is the hardest thing that you can do other than having kids, something like that. Or, you know, 8 out of 10 businesses fail within their first 5 years, 9 out of 10 within the first 2 years, something like that. There, all these statistics that people use and they fear. And I'm just like, I never understood that. I'm like, I don't know what it is, but I'm just, I I don't make decisions out of fear. It's just problems are not the impetus for my improvement. My own greatness is. That's how I see things. And that's why I do this. I want to help influence others to see the greatness within themselves and make decisions off of that instead of just playing a correction game. And it's like, well, what are you even correcting? Because
Right.
you're correcting something that someone else wants you to correct. It's not even, now we're just playing, catch up to someone else's game of life. And I've always just valued being different. I've always valued taking harder routes, taking more challenging routes. That's just, I think that comes from being a goalkeeper. I think that comes from uh, understanding that playing for your father is not going to be easy. Screw it, do it anyway, right? And just stuff like that. It's been a part of my upbringing to do stuff like that. So it wasn't a tough transition. It was very exciting. Um, there's not to say that it's been a perfect ride. There's just like anything else, there's going to be bumps along the road and you're going to learn and you're going to figure them out. But it's nothing I wasn't expecting. It's nothing I don't feel like I wasn't actually prepared for. Um, so
Yeah, and I think you talked about it. A lot of what you brought up too is just that a lot of the skill set that athletes have, and I think the challenges, the leadership, just different things that you just brought up in preparing for those next steps. And I think that's something that there's a lot that athletes have to offer. I mean, I was talking to one guy, and I was bringing this up. He was played college football, ultimately became a CEO for a couple of successful companies, and he implored athletes to utilize that skill set that you have. People want you, and just don't don't end up being like, oh my gosh, I'm Alex the soccer player, Rob the runner, Joe the football player, Susie the swimmer. You're a person. You got many years ahead of you. So let's talk about now. Talk about elite mental performance. This is, I always joke and say, kind of your corporate commercial, so to speak. But talk about some of the things that you're doing there, and ultimately how people can find you.
yeah, so Elite Mental Performance is a sports psychology training platform, and I work with individuals one on one. I also work with a local soccer club in Charlotte called Queen City Mutiny that play in the MLS Next Division. And what I do is I work with athletes on developing their mental framework, which is their, in a way, it's not even a psychological approach. It's more of their own personal philosophical approach to their sport, to themselves within their sport. So they're working off of that. And then we start to build a psychological foundation, understanding their identity, who they are as a person, who they are as an athlete, how they're going to go about their journey with particular mindsets and habits, how we're going to craft your goals with process, performance, and outcome goals, and then why you do what you do with passions and purpose. So creating that foundation gives you a nice strong center hold on what to develop. And then after that, you start to develop your psychological skills training. You go into visualization training, go into self-talk training, focus training, dealing with performance states, performance anxiety, dealing with setbacks, setting performance routines. And it's very in-depth, thorough, comprehensive program. As you probably could tell just off of the amount of things that I've listed.
Yeah.
But I make it easy for the athlete. I just guide them through it, and they just have to kind of answer the questions, do the exercises I'm providing, and they'll start to see how, okay, now things have started to change, right? I'm playing the same sport as everyone else, but now I'm playing a different game. And that's when you start to feel this sense of power and autonomy of, okay, I understand that I have team goals and the coach wants certain things of me. They're non-negotiables of the organization that I have to abide to. Those are all accurate. But after that, what are you doing individually? How are you empowering yourself within your sport? And that's when you start to make decisions based off of not what other people, you may think that other people think, right? But what you want. And it's been a very rewarding journey so far. And I'm excited to see what comes next. But yeah, so that's pretty much the foundation of it all.
Now, are you working? Is it virtual? Is it in person? Is it both?
Good question. So right now, the majority of my athletes are virtual. They're spread out across the country. I would work with people in person in Charlotte if, I have a couple that I do already. So that's open for both. And if people want to find me, there's a variety of ways that they can find me. My Instagram is elite_mental performance. And through that, you can DM me, but I also post some sports psychology information. You can also go to my website. It's www.elitementalperformance.net and check out the website. There's a contact form there. Subscribe to the website. You'll get blog posts. You'll get mental performance training exercises. Anytime I'm hosting a free webinar or workshop on some psychological topic, more than welcome to join and sign up. Just subscribe and you'll get all of the updates to those kinds of things.
That's great, and I highly encourage go out and follow Alex and look at his site. And there's a lot to be said about helping with the performance, and the mental is a big part of the game, obviously. And so to be able to tap into that while you're still playing is great. And then I'm sure there's even working with these athletes, when they're done, and helping them, with that next approach to, the mental health side, or even just anything that goes along with as they transition out of sports. So Alex, it's been great. We really appreciate all your time today. You can find us on alumnidirect.com. Follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram, Twitter. We're all out there. And I really encourage, follow the show on our Alumni Direct YouTube channel, or we're across all the podcast networks. But we really want to make an impact on athletes and helping them to transition out of sports. So again, it's been great, and I hope everybody has a great day.